The moment my wife tossed divorce papers across the kitchen table and smirked, I knew she thought she'd won. She believed her secret affair had broken me. But what Sophie didn't realize was that I'd been planning my revenge for months. And by the time she reached for her new lover, she'd already lost everything. 8 years of marriage can disguise a lot of things. Resentment, boredom, betrayal. But that night, there was no disguise left. Sophie stood in our kitchen, holding a stack of crisp papers she tossed across the table like she was dealing cards. Her voice was low but sharp enough to slice straight through the last threads of trust between us. "I've been seeing someone," she said, her eyes locked on mine, "for 8 months. His name is Damien, and he's better than you in every way." The words didn't surprise me. Not really. I'd felt something shifting months before. How she'd come home late without explanations. How she'd tilt her phone away when she texted. The lies weren't even clever. But hearing her finally admit it brought a strange sense of relief. At least I didn't have to pretend anymore. She must have mistaken my silence for shock. Sophie stepped closer, her tone growing colder. "If you even think about going near him, I swear to God, I'll have you locked up." She was daring me to explode, to start screaming or throwing things so she could claim she was the victim. But I didn't react, because she didn't know I'd already moved past anger. I'd spent the last few weeks laying the groundwork for the moment she would show her hand. I had watched her pretend, watched her slip away bit by bit, all while planning exactly how to take everything back. Her confidence was almost theatrical, as if she believed this was the moment she'd win. She expected me to crumble, but I was past caring about her validation. I was already focused on what came next. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow breath. "You want a divorce?" I asked calmly. Sophie blinked. For a split second, something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty, maybe even regret. But she recovered fast, squaring her shoulders. "Yes, I'm done pretending." I picked up the papers, flipping through them like they were nothing more than a credit card statement. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask her why she did it. I just looked up and nodded. "Fine." That single word seemed to rattle her more than any accusation. She'd built herself up for a fight, rehearsed her speeches, imagined me pleading with her not to leave. And instead, I'd handed her exactly what she asked for, freedom. But she didn't realize what came with it. While Sophie spent her nights in cheap hotels and borrowed apartments with Damien, I was quietly moving our savings into a private account she couldn't touch. I spoke to my attorney about the house, legally mine before we were married, and made sure the paperwork was airtight. I closed out every shared credit card. The day she walked out was the day she lost everything she'd taken for granted. I stood up and motioned toward the hallway. "Go pack your things." She tilted her head, frowning. "Excuse me? You're not staying here tonight." Her mouth opened in protest, but I raised my hand. "This is my house, Sophie. The car in the driveway, mine too. The money in our accounts, you'll find it's not yours anymore." The air shifted. That smug certainty she'd carried in her voice started to waver. "You can't just kick me out," she said, but the defiance sounded hollow now. I smiled. A small, tired smile I didn't feel. "Actually, I can." She stared at me, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Maybe she finally realized I wasn't the man she could bully into submission. Maybe she understood that all her leverage was built on lies. Sophie took a step back. Her voice turned uncertain. "Where am I supposed to go?" I shrugged. "You'll figure it out. You seem pretty resourceful." In that instant, I saw the truth register in her eyes. She'd gambled everything. Our marriage, our home, her security. On a man she didn't really know. She'd bet on Damien being her salvation. But she didn't know that while she was playing games, I was doing my homework. I knew Damien's full story. The failed businesses, the mountains of debt, the legal threats he was too cowardly to face. I knew he wasn't who she thought he was, and I knew it would all catch up to them both. Sophie pressed her lips together, trying to salvage her pride. "I don't need any of this. Damien is going to take care of me." I looked her dead in the eye. "Sure he is." Her hands trembled just a little as she gathered her purse. She walked past me, her gaze fixed on the door, as if she could outrun the fallout. But you can't outrun the truth. In the hallway, she hesitated. Maybe she wanted to say something that would sting, some final barb to remind me how little I mattered to her. But all she managed was a shaky breath. I didn't follow her. I didn't watch her walk away. I just turned back to the table and set the divorce papers aside. My heart was steady. I felt no regret. Sophie thought she was delivering my defeat that night. What she didn't understand was that she was only setting the stage for her own. And I had never been more ready. Sophie left that night believing she had scored some final, decisive victory. Maybe she pictured me sitting alone in the dark, wondering how I'd lost her. What she didn't understand was that her departure didn't leave me broken. It left me free to finish what I'd started. By the next morning, I was already meeting with my attorney to finalize the paperwork transferring every remaining joint asset into my name. The house, purchased years before our marriage, was secured beyond any claim she might attempt. Her car lease was tied to my credit. The joint account was emptied, legally, because I had anticipated this moment for months. I'd seen the signs before she realized she was broadcasting them. The late work meetings she never quite explained. The way her phone never left her hand, always turned face down on the table. The fake casual tone she used when she said she needed space to think. So I gathered proof. Quietly, patiently. The private investigator I hired cost more than I liked, but he was thorough. He tailed Sophie and Damien across state lines, into hotels, restaurants, anywhere they thought they could hide. Photos, receipts, audio recordings, an entire record of her double life, just in case she decided to paint herself as the wronged party. After Sophie walked out, she didn't contact me for 3 days. I assumed she was with Damien, laying low while she waited to see if I would snap. She likely hoped I'd make some rash move she could twist into evidence of abuse or harassment. But I didn't call her. I didn't text. I didn't react. Instead, I made an appointment with the bank to close every remaining shared financial link. I updated my will. I changed passwords. I canceled cards. Everything was methodical. No part of this was driven by rage. It was driven by clarity. By the 4th day, Sophie finally reached out. An email with no greeting, no warmth. We need to discuss the division of assets. Please respond to schedule a meeting. I didn't answer. My attorney did. He attached documentation confirming that all property remained in my name and that no further discussion was necessary. That afternoon, I drove past the apartment complex where Damien lived. My investigator had already confirmed the address, along with every detail of Damien's messy finances. He was in debt deeper than Sophie could comprehend. Credit cards maxed out. Loans from private lenders. A history of borrowing money from acquaintances who eventually turned into creditors threatening lawsuits. But Sophie didn't know any of that. She thought she'd traded up. A new life. A thrilling escape from stability. She thought Damien represented adventure, maybe even success. I parked across the street and watched for a few minutes. The place looked ordinary enough, but I knew the reality behind its walls. Eviction warnings pinned to the door, notices taped to mailboxes. The life she'd chosen was built on nothing. Felt strange standing there. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant, to savor the satisfaction of knowing how this would end for her. But the truth was, it felt more like watching a slow-motion disaster I couldn't and wouldn't intervene to stop. 2 days later, Sophie called. I let it ring. She tried again and again until she finally left a voicemail. Her voice was tight, controlled. She was trying not to let me hear the panic. Nathan, I know you're angry, but this doesn't have to be ugly. I'd really like to settle this in a way that's fair to both of us. I didn't bother replying. She was realizing she had no leverage. That weekend, I sent my investigator one final instruction. Deliver the file on Damien to Sophie. Every photo, every debt record, every piece of proof that the man she'd risked everything for was a fraud. I didn't do it to humiliate her, though I won't pretend I didn't enjoy imagining her reaction. I did it so she couldn't pretend ignorance later, so that when everything collapsed, she'd know it was her choice. A courier delivered the file to the address she'd provided. Less than an hour later, she called again. This time, her voice was raw, edged with fear. You've been following me? You've been spying on me? I almost laughed, as if she had any right to indignation. I answered calmly, You left me no choice. You're insane, she hissed. You think this proves something? It proves I was right, I said, and that you were wrong. She hung up. That was the last time she tried to act like she was still in control. From then on, she sent only a few messages, short, anxious bursts asking if I'd tell anyone else about Damien's debts or if I planned to go public. I ignored them all. She didn't realize I had no intention of exposing her to the world. She'd already doomed herself just by leaving with him. When I walked into work Monday morning, everything felt different, lighter. For the first time in months, I didn't have to pretend to be the forgiving husband, the fool who didn't know what was happening behind his back. Sophie had underestimated me. She assumed that my patience meant weakness. But I hadn't been passive. I'd simply been waiting, watching her build her fantasy until she couldn't tell it from reality. And now she was stuck with it. I drove home that evening and stepped into the quiet of my house. No more lies waiting on the other side of the door. No more tension pressing in on me every time I turned around. Some betrayals happen in an instant. Others unfold in slow, deliberate steps. Sophie's had been a little of both. But the result was the same. She thought she could walk out and still hold power over me. She was wrong. The next chapter of her life was beginning. So was mine. And only one of us was prepared for it. A week after Sophie received the file on Damien, she showed up at my house unannounced. I'd expected her to come eventually. The woman who tossed divorce papers at me with a smirk now looked like she hadn't slept in days. She didn't knock. She just tried the door and found it locked. After a minute, she pounded her fist against the frame. Nathan, open the door. I watched her through the side window, her hand clenched around her phone. I stayed still, letting her stew in the reality she'd created. She tried again, her voice rising. I know you're in there. We need to talk. Only when her shouting stopped did I open the door a crack. She pushed past me before I could say a word, moving into the living room like she still belonged there. I'm not leaving until you listen, she said. I shut the door, leaning against it. All right, talk. Her eyes were glassy, but she was trying to compose herself. I don't know what you think you've accomplished. Yes, Damien has some issues, but that doesn't change the fact that you've been tracking me like some psychopath. I almost smiled. Even cornered, she wanted to pretend she was in control. You think he just has issues? I asked quietly. Did you even read all of it? I don't care about your file, she snapped. It doesn't change how I feel. Then why are you here? For the first time, she faltered. The anger slipped away, and her voice softened. Because he's disappeared. I stayed silent, letting her fill the space. He was supposed to meet me yesterday. I waited for hours. His phone's off. His brother hasn't heard from him in days. Her gaze lifted, searching my expression. I know you're behind this. I folded my arms. I didn't force Damien to skip town. You sent his debts to his creditors, she accused. I made sure the truth got out. That's it. Her breath came unsteady. Do you have any idea what you've done? He's in danger. I straightened. So are you. Those people he owes. How long do you think it'll take before they realize you were part of his life? Her face went pale. Do you know what happens when you run up that much debt and disappear? I asked. They don't just forget. You're lying, she whispered. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. In seconds, I had Damien's last known location, an ATM camera still shot. I held it up so she could see. He withdrew everything he could before he vanished, I said. He's not coming back, Sophie. She took a step back, her hands trembling. Why are you doing this to me? I shook my head. You did this to yourself. She tried to recover, tried to conjure some shred of defiance. It doesn't matter. I don't need him. I can figure this out. Then why are you here? I repeated. She didn't answer. I gestured toward the door. You should go. She shook her head. No. You have to help me. I felt something harden in my chest. For months, I'd held back my anger because I thought there was no point in fighting. But now, standing here, watching her beg after she'd betrayed everything we'd built together, I finally let it rise. Help you, I said, my voice low. You walked out of this house without hesitation. You chose him over me. You called me pathetic, remember? She swallowed. I was angry. I didn't mean. You meant every word. I cut in. You thought you were trading up, that you'd found someone better. But you didn't even bother to find out who he really was. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't look away. You left me to chase some fantasy, I continued. Now it's over, and you're here because you have nowhere else to go. She dropped onto the edge of the couch, pressing her palms to her knees. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. Silence fell. For a moment, she just stared at the floor. When she finally looked up, her voice was barely audible. I thought he loved me. I'm sure he loved your money, your status, the idea of having someone to bail him out. Her lip trembled. Please, Nathan, you don't have to take me back. But just help me. Tell me what to do. I studied her, wondering if she understood that some choices can't be undone. You think I'm going to save you, I said. But the truth is, I don't owe you anything. Her mouth opened like she wanted to argue, but she stopped. For the first time, I saw her recognize that she had no leverage, no defense. She was just a woman who'd burned every bridge and finally realized there was no way back. I walked to the door and opened it. You should leave before it gets dark. She stayed sitting, shaking her head. I can't go back there. I don't feel safe. That's not my problem, I said, my voice flat. Her tears started to fall. Nathan, please. You ended this, I said, and now you have to live with it. She looked at me like she might keep pleading, but eventually she stood up. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, her shoulders slumping under the weight of what she'd done. When she stepped onto the porch, she paused, turning to look at me one last time. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered. I didn't respond. I just closed the door. I stood in the quiet, listening as her footsteps faded down the walk. I thought I might feel triumphant. Instead, all I felt was the certainty that this was the only ending possible. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. After Sophie walked out of my house for the last time, she tried to pretend she still had options. Over the next week, she sent a string of polite but desperate emails, each sounding more strained than the last. I think we can be reasonable about this. I hope you'll reconsider. This doesn't have to be permanent. Let's at least talk about a settlement. I didn't answer any of them. My attorney forwarded her lawyer the final documents confirming that she was entitled to nothing beyond what the law required. No extra payouts. No access to my accounts. No property she hadn't purchased herself. While I closed out the last financial ties between us, she was busy discovering just how shallow her new life was. Damien had vanished, likely running from the creditors who were now trying to reach her. A few of them must have gotten her phone number from the records I'd shared. She called once to scream at me about it, her voice shaking with panic. You think this makes you look strong? She shouted. It just proves you're petty and cruel. I listened without replying. When she realized I wouldn't react, she hung up. That was the last time she tried to pretend she was angry rather than scared. 2 days later, I heard from her sister, Claire. She sent me a short message. Sophie's trying to stay with me, but she won't tell me the truth about what happened. I thought you should know. I wrote back only one sentence. She'll have to figure it out herself. That evening, I poured a drink and sat by the window, feeling the first calm I'd known in months. It was over. Not just the marriage, but the anxiety, the double-checking, the constant wondering if I was imagining it all. I thought about the moment Sophie had told me she'd found someone better. The smug certainty in her voice. She was so sure she'd outgrown me, that I was just an obstacle in the way of her real happiness. She never considered that her perfect escape was built on lies. A week passed with no word. Then, on a quiet Sunday morning, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Local man wanted for questioning in fraud case disappears. I clicked on the link and saw Damien's name. A grainy photo showed him in a parking garage, head down, moving fast. The story detailed how he'd been borrowing money from private lenders, promising big returns, and never delivering. It mentioned lawsuits, threats of criminal charges, and the possibility that he'd fled the state. I set my phone down and closed my eyes. This was what Sophie had traded her life for. A man who couldn't even face the consequences of his own failures. The next day, she came back. I was in my driveway checking the mail when her car pulled up to the curb. She got out slowly, like she wasn't sure whether I'd tell her to leave before she could speak. "Nathan," she called, her voice brittle. I didn't answer. I waited. She walked closer, stopping just out of reach. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. "Can we talk?" I turned back toward the house. "We've said everything. Please." She sounded small, the last of her pride stripped away. "I don't know what to do." I faced her. "You're not my responsibility." Her shoulders sagged. "I know, but you were the only person who ever cared if I was okay. Even when you shouldn't have. That was before you decided I wasn't good enough," I said. Her eyes flicked away. "I made a mistake. I know." Silence stretched between us. She opened her mouth like she wanted to beg, but she couldn't seem to find the words. "I'm staying at a friend's," she said finally. "But I don't think I can stay there long. They don't want to get involved." "That's not my problem," I repeated. Tears pooled in her eyes. "I thought Damien said he had everything under control. He said we could start fresh. He told me I was special." "He told you what you needed to hear," I said quietly. Her jaw clenched. "I was stupid." "Yes." Her voice cracked. "What am I supposed to do now?" I looked at her for a long moment. Part of me almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But pity wasn't enough to erase the reality she'd created. "You start over," I said. "The same way you decided you didn't need me." She wiped her face with her sleeve. "I don't even have money for a deposit on an apartment. You should have thought of that before you left." She took a step closer. "Nathan, I don't expect you to forgive me, but please just help me get through this." I didn't answer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You always took care of me, even when I didn't deserve it." "That was before," I said. Car passed behind us. She turned to look, as if hoping someone else might come rescue her. When she turned back, her expression was hollow. "You really don't care at all anymore," she said. I met her eyes. "I care enough to let you face the truth." She swallowed hard. "So this is it? This is it." She stood there for another few seconds, searching my face. When she finally turned and walked back to her car, she moved like someone twice her age. I waited until she pulled away before I went inside. My hands weren't shaking. My heart didn't race. I didn't feel victorious, only certain that this was what had to happen. Sophie had chosen her path the moment she decided honesty and loyalty were optional. She'd gambled everything on a man who ran when things got hard. I thought of the version of myself who might have forgiven her, who might have believed that love was enough to fix the wreckage she'd caused. That man was gone, and I didn't miss him. The months after Sophie left were quieter than I ever expected. I'd imagined that when everything ended, there would be chaos. Endless calls, confrontations, legal threats. But there was none of that. She seemed to understand, finally, that she'd exhausted every opportunity to manipulate me. I signed the final divorce documents in my attorney's office on a rainy afternoon. The whole process took less than 15 minutes. He handed me a copy, and I set it in a folder without a word. There was no moment of satisfaction, no surge of triumph. It simply felt complete. Sophie tried one more time to contact me. She sent an email longer than the others, and I read it once before deleting it. "I know you won't answer. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I never planned for any of this. I thought Damien was someone he wasn't. I thought I was doing what would make me happy. I was wrong about everything." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. In the weeks that followed, I started rebuilding my life. Simple things like cooking dinner for myself instead of ordering takeout. Getting up early because I wanted to, not because I was trying to avoid seeing her in the kitchen. Rediscovering parts of myself I'd ignored because I was too busy trying to hold together something that had already fallen apart. When people asked what had happened, I told them the truth. We grew apart. There was no need to embarrass her further by sharing the details. She'd done that to herself already. I heard bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances. Damien never resurfaced. Some people said he'd left the state. Others claimed he'd gone overseas to avoid his creditors. No one knew for sure, and after a while nobody cared. Sophie moved into a small apartment on the edge of town. She picked up freelance work, things she could do from home. Her sister told me she was embarrassed to show her face in public, that she'd become almost invisible overnight. One afternoon, months later, I ran into Claire at a cafe. She slid into the seat across from me without asking and watched me for a moment. "You look good," she said. I thanked her, unsure what she really wanted. She stirred her coffee. "Sophie's been calling me a lot lately. She says she doesn't know who she is anymore." I didn't comment. Claire continued. "I told her she should have thought about that before she blew up her life. She made her choice," I said. "She did," Claire agreed. She hesitated. "I'm not saying this to make you feel sorry for her. I just thought you should know she finally understands what she lost." I met her eyes. "It's too late." Claire nodded slowly. "Yeah, it is." She didn't stay long. When she left, I sat there for a while, thinking about what it meant when someone finally faced the consequences of their own decisions. I never wanted Sophie to be ruined. I just needed her to realize that betrayal doesn't end when you walk out the door. It follows you. A few weeks later, I received the last piece of paperwork closing our shared accounts. There were no more legal ties. No more reasons for her to contact me. That evening, I poured a drink and sat out on my balcony, looking out over the city. I thought about the man I'd been a year before, the man who believed love meant tolerating anything, forgiving everything, the man who ignored the obvious signs because he didn't want to face the truth. I didn't hate that man, but I was glad he was gone. When I finally got up, I felt lighter than I could remember feeling in years. Some betrayals don't just end relationships. They force you to rebuild who you are. Sophie had once been the person I planned to share my life with. She'd also been the person who taught me I'd rather be alone than disrespected. In the months that followed, I didn't date. I didn't rush to fill the space she left. I spent time with friends I'd neglected, with family I'd always promised to visit. I started running again, something I hadn't done since we got married. One evening, I saw her from a distance. She was walking out of a grocery store, carrying a single bag, her shoulders slumped. She didn't see me and I didn't call out. For a moment, I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. But it wasn't regret. It was the memory of a life that had already ended. As I watched her disappear into the parking lot, I realized the final truth. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. You can't build a future with someone who doesn't value loyalty. And you can't respect someone who refuses to respect you. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee in the quiet, and thought about everything I'd survived. I'd lost a wife. I'd lost the illusion that I needed her to be whole. But I'd gained something more important than either. The understanding that sometimes, letting go isn't defeat. It's freedom. When people ask how it all ended, I tell them the simplest version. She thought I was weak. She was wrong. And I never looked back.